Hello and welcome back to the comfy corner here, where I'd like to present to you this lovely dainty French artillery musketoon. Now this started life as a model 1829 and finished its career as a 1829 T bis artillery musketoon, and started its life in this particular one in 1831 as a smoothbore percussion musketoon, and ended its life with rifled bore, adjustable rear sight. So it's an interesting illustration or journey through the different technological leaps that were happening in that sort of 40-year lifespan. You get the advent of percussion, and then rifling and the development of different projectiles. And this carbine went through a few things. So it wasn't just smoothbore, flintlock, and then suddenly it's rifled, converted to percussion, and fires Minier. It's not quite that simple. So I thought you could join me on the journey it took, and then we'll take a look a bit at the ammunition, and then we'll take it to the range. So up until the adoption of the 1829 musketoon, French artillery crews were mostly on foot, and they had what were effectively slightly shortened infantry muskets. So the 1777 artillery musket was just a short musket. Then when the year 9 system arrives, they get given actually the same gun as the dragoons, which is again slightly shortened musket. In 1816 they have their own dedicated artillery pattern again, but it's still a shortened musket, an inch or so. However, in 1820 there comes a new design of artillery carriage on which the gun crews can ride with their pieces, and this of course makes things with a huge musket extremely impractical. So they're forced to look at a redesign for the defensive muskets for the crews. So they turn their attention to what the cavalry have, which is a nice 1822 Cavalry Carbine. Not a musketoon, it's a carbine, which basically looks more or less identical to this, in flintlock obviously, except it has a sling bar. So they get rid of the sling bar since it's not necessary. They lengthen the barrel ever so slightly, 9 centimeters, and they give it a ramrod, which the cavalry would have in the saddlebags. So then this is then the pure 1829 musketoon, and the caliber, or the bore diameter, is 17.1 millimeters. So the artillery now have this short, light, handy musketoon, and nothing happens for 10 years, pretty much, and then we come to 1840, which is the time when France decides to transition to percussion once and for good, which is more or less the date for most countries. They had developed some military percussion firearms before that date, but 1840 is really the time when they decide this is, we're not going back, and we're also going to convert all the flintlocks that are currently in service to percussion. And this is where the T conversion is applied. And you can see this in a lot of pistols, carbines, musketoons and muskets. They are referred to model 18 something something T. So this is when the smoothbore will have been converted to percussion. And in this case what they did, obviously changed the hammer, plugged the flash hole, the priming pan was removed, and you can see here where it was, and they plug it with a steel insert which is screwed in secured with a screw from the rear so it doesn't fly off anywhere. It's given then this very characteristic, distinctive spherical bolster for the nipple, which is brazed in place. And on the 1829 musketoon and the 1822 pistol, they also reamed out the barrels to 17.6. I don't really know why. They're originally 17.1, which seems to have been relatively small compared to the others, all the other guns in service. So maybe they just thought, since they're all going through the arsenal service, may as well widen out the bore so they more or less match the others. So that was the T conversion, and there's a little curly T behind the model number here on the breech tang. Okay, so now we move forward to 1846, which is when the bis part of the T-bis conversion happens. So the second, really the major upgrade. And this is when the bore is rifled with progressive rifling developed by Mr. Minier himself. It's given a new ramrod, which we'll come to in a second. An adjustable rear sight. Well, it has a sight leaf with a series of apertures. The little circles with a notch in the bottom to up to 600 meters. And it's given a tige breech, or a pillar breech, which is an invention of Mr. Touvenin, quite popular throughout Europe in the 1840s. And the principle here was that you had a flat-based conical, which was invented by Mr. Tamisier. That would be lowered down and sat on top of the pillar. And with your stout ramrod, you would give it a firm whack or two, and that would then upset to expand and upset and grip the rifling and stabilize in flight. It does work. I used to have an enormous Norwegian pillar breech rifle which shot exceptionally well. So in terms of accuracy, it's perfectly fine. The downside was that you had this annular powder chamber effectively, which fouled up quickly and was you couldn't really clean properly. So prone to corrosion and damage to the pillar. So yes, transition to rifling, but not the Minier system. And in fact, the pillar breech system was the prevalent rifled firearm of the French during the Crimean. It wasn't Minier. This was incidentally also issued to zouaves, buglers, standard bearers, that kind of thing. Anybody that needed a short, handy rifled firearm. Now, referring to the ramrod, something that's peculiar about it is that firstly, it's got this enormous heavy head. Now that is explained by the use of the pillar breech system. So you need a certain mass to hammer down onto the bullet. But the second part of the oddity is the quite deep conical cavity in there. Now that has two purposes. Firstly, it's simply to protect the tip of the bullet. It fits nicely like a little cup, and the cup is also used as a powder measure to reduce the load, the service charge from the cartridge, because all the Touvenin Musketoons and the Chasseur carbines used the same cartridge. They were the only ones using the Tamisier projectile, so they got one cartridge issued to all the firearms using pillar breech system. And what you would have to do was, when you opened your cartridge, you would pour some powder into this cavity, chuck that away, and then load the rest as normal. So you reduced from 4.5 grams of powder to 3 grams of powder. Incidentally, the cavalry, the 1822 T-bis pistols use exactly the same principle. They have a tulip-shaped ramrod head for exactly that purpose. It may seem curious in terms of battlefield efficiency, but you have to consider that these are basically purely defensive firearms. You'd be firing your artillery pieces, and if people got too close too quickly, cavalry, that kind of thing, you would try and keep them at bay with this, but your mates are frantically hooking up your gun and getting the hell out of there on horseback. So you wouldn't be firing in line with these and furiously reloading multiple times. And the same goes for the cavalry pistols. You would fire your volley as you charged in, and then you get out the cold steel. So the fact that it's a little bit fussy for reloading isn't really an issue. So that was the major upgrade. Oh yes, also I forgot that it was given a bayonet lug. This was fitted with the magnificent 1842 Yatagan Bayonet, which is, I don't have one, but I have a chassepot which has the same dimensions. The only difference is that the keyon here is bent downwards instead of upwards, and yeah, then you get this. I mean, it's ridiculous compared to the size of the Musketoon. I can't even get it in camera. But yeah, it was given that. I suspect that the artillery used these more as a tool for chopping and that kind of thing. But yes, the original did not have a bayonet fitted. So now we have the 1829 T bis Musketoon, and then come a series of little incremental changes which are due to changes in ammunition, which are minor things that you only see if you really take a closer look. So the first of those changes comes in 1855 when they decide to do away with those funny little sight leaf with holes in, and it just has a conventional slider. Then 1 year later, then is introduced the first genuine Minié projectile, hollow-based conical with a flat nose, so that must have really thwacked when it hit flesh. Obviously then the pillar breech principle is superfluous, and the tige are removed whenever they come through the system, and obviously the newly produced Musketoons just don't have it in them. Then the final iteration comes in 1860 when a new Minié projectile comes on the scene with a very particular tetrahedron shaped cavity, and when they get this means that they need a new rear sight, because now the range is extended. It's now up to 650, so an extra 50 meters gained, and they also make sure that all the guns that come through have the pillars removed, so there should be none left, and I have never seen or heard of one apart from in the museum collections that still has its pillar breech. It's probably even rarer than any in original flintlock condition. So there we go, we've gone through the whole life cycle of this little carbine, or the modification life cycle, and it was into service up to and including the Franco-Prussian War. So before I take you to the range, I'll just give you a little quick view of the cartridge. Now the cartridge I'm using is actually the last ordnance cartridge used by the French. So it has the 1863 Minié, which has a pyramidal cavity instead of a tetrahedron. And I'll quickly just show you how to make it, and then we'll go to the range. So we have a cardboard powder tube, paper powder tube, and an outer envelope. So we start off with the cardboard tube. Doesn't have to be very thick, and the purpose here is to protect the powder and also act as a reinforcement, so you can snap that bit of the cartridge off when loading. You'll see it on the range later. So now we have the additional outer layer, paper layer for the load. Protects the powder and also allows you to close off the powder charge so as it's separate from the Minié. So just twist it and poke it in the cavity in the mandrel and just force that in to give some space for the mini ball that's going to be tucked in there. So then you just push the nose in there to the end of the powder tube so that about 15mm sticks out, so the envelope sticks out 15mm from the back of the Minié, and then fold it up as tightly as you can so that it'll enter the bore nicely. If you do it too loose, sometimes with the grease it comes out a bit too fat. So wrap that up nicely and then twist the end off again, pinch and twist, and then shove that into the cavity. Give it a quick poke so it goes in there nicely. So now you just need to take the mandrel out. Sometimes the powder tube comes with it, but you can just push it back in. And then pour in the charge and dip it in some hot wax up the cylindrical part of the bullet, or perhaps preferably the other way around. Wax it first and then put in your charge. And then you just need to fold in the edges at the top, kink it over, and we're ready to go. Woohoo!
A hit. You're going up. Oh, you can keep going. Yeah. Numb fingers.
So I hope you liked that little shooting session. There's still work to be done, clearly. I actually used a faster powder because that's all I have on hand at the moment. So it was 3F as opposed to being 1F, 1.5F. So that'll partially explain the tendency to hit high, although these hit high anyway, especially at 50 meters, obviously, even with aiming right down at the bottom of the card. However, I was pretty pleased that the holes are nice and round, so the bullets are stabilizing and hitting nice and square. Obviously, I also loaded the cartridges with the appropriate load, so the 3 grams and not the 4.5 and bleeding off, because I don't want to waste powder or decant it off into something else on the range. So yeah, very enjoyable to shoot, pretty snappy as you can imagine, but actually the recoil isn't too bad at all. So I hope you enjoyed this journey from A to Z, effectively, through the percussion era. And thank you all for watching. Thank you all for your patience and for your support on whichever platform you wish to contribute. Thanks very much, and see you next time. Bye.